Black man kicked from first class. One call later, the airline faces ruin. The moment they told him to stand up, the cabin went quiet in a way that felt heavier than turbulence. Not the polite quiet of people minding their own business, but the kind where every breath feels watched, where everyone knows something wrong is happening and no one knows what to do about it. Marcus Lewis looked down at the boarding pass in his hand. First class, seat 2A, then back up at the flight attendant whose smile had already faded into something tight and rehearsed. He had no idea that this moment, this single command spoken too softly to record but loudly enough to wound, would unravel an airline's image and expose truths far beyond one flight. Marcus had flown his whole life, but first class was new to him. Not because he didn't belong there, but because he'd spent years believing comfort was something other people earned more easily. He was 38, tall, calm-faced, dressed in a charcoal blazer over a plain white shirt. No flashy watch, no loud confidence. He'd learned long ago that blending in was safer than standing out. This seat was a gift to himself after closing a deal that took 10 years of quiet persistence. 10 years of being underestimated, ignored, talked over. He had boarded early, nodded politely, and sat down without a word. The man across the aisle kept glancing at him. The woman behind him sighed loudly. A few minutes later, the attendant returned, this time with a supervisor. "Sir," she said, "we need to verify your seat." Marcus handed over his pass again. The supervisor didn't look at it for long. "There seems to be an issue," he said. "You'll need to move to economy." Marcus felt the familiar heat rise in his chest. The old question he'd carried since childhood. "Why me?" He kept his voice steady. "Is there a reason?" The supervisor's eyes flicked toward the man across the aisle. "This seat is needed," he said, vague and final. Needed by whom? Marcus wondered. The plane wasn't full. He could see empty seats. He could feel eyes on him now, curiosity sharpening into judgment. He stood slowly because he knew what happened when black men moved too fast in moments like this. As he walked down the aisle, the silence followed him like a shadow. He didn't argue. He didn't shout. He didn't record. He sat in economy, hands folded, heart pounding. Not from anger, but from a deep, old exhaustion. When the plane took off, he stared out the window and made a decision he hadn't expected to make. He took out his phone, scrolled through contacts, and stopped at a name he rarely used in situations like this. One call, he thought. Just one. The phone rang twice. "Marcus." The voice answered, surprised but warm. "It's me," Marcus said quietly. "I'm on a flight. I need your help." By the time the plane landed, the story had already begun moving faster than the aircraft ever could. Emails were sent. Screenshots forwarded. A calm, detailed account of events. No accusations. No emotional language. Circulated through legal teams and corporate offices. Marcus didn't post anything. He didn't need to. The call he made wasn't to a friend looking for sympathy, but to a partner who understood systems, patterns, and consequences. The next morning, the airline's headquarters buzzed with confusion. A routine incident report had escalated into an emergency meeting. Legal counsel flagged potential violations. PR teams scrambled as internal footage surfaced, showing empty first-class seats, showing Marcus's boarding pass clearly valid. Someone asked the question no one wanted to answer. Why was he moved? By noon, journalists were calling. By evening, sponsors were uneasy. Employees whispered about similar incidents they'd seen. Similar passengers quietly relocated, quietly humiliated. Patterns don't stay hidden forever. They wait. Marcus woke up to messages he hadn't expected. From strangers thanking him. From old classmates admitting they'd watched him endure things they never questioned. He sat at his kitchen table, coffee cooling in his hands, and felt something unfamiliar bloom where anger used to live. Not revenge. Accountability. The airline released a statement that afternoon, carefully worded and hollow. It apologized for the inconvenience. The public response was immediate and unforgiving. Inconvenience was a delayed bag. This was dignity. This was trust. This was the difference between policy and practice. Then came the second call. Marcus's phone rang again, late that night. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Lewis?" the voice said, formal and strained. "We'd like to speak with you about a resolution." Marcus listened. He asked questions. He took notes. He didn't raise his voice. When the call ended, he leaned back and exhaled. Not in relief, but in clarity. The story wasn't about a seat. It never had been. Over the following weeks, investigations unfolded. Training protocols were exposed as outdated and biased. Executives resigned quietly. Stock prices dipped, then slid. Competitors took note. Passengers paid attention. The airline tried to move on, but the narrative had changed. People remembered how easily someone could be erased with a polite smile and a vague excuse. Marcus was invited to speak, not as a victim, but as a voice of reason. He talked about the cost of silence, about the power of calm truth, about how systems only change when people refuse to shrink. He didn't shame. He explained. He reminded rooms full of decision-makers that progress wasn't loud. It was consistent on his next flight. Months later, Marcus boarded early again. Same calm, same quiet confidence. A different airline, a different energy. The attendant smiled, genuinely this time, and said, "Welcome aboard, sir." Marcus sat down, not because he needed the comfort, but because he'd earned the right to exist without question. As the plane lifted into the sky, he looked around at the strangers sharing the cabin with him and felt something steady and hopeful settle in his chest. One call hadn't ruined an airline. It had revealed it. And in doing so, it reminded everyone watching that dignity doesn't ask for permission. It waits for courage.